Okay, have you ever talked to your phone and wondered how it gets you 1 second but then totally misunderstands you the next? Well, today we're going to pull back the curtain on that exact magic, the tech that lets our computers and phones actually speak and understand human language. Let's dive in. The big picture technology behind all of this has a name: natural language processing, or just NLP for short. And you can think of NLP as covering the entire conversation, from the moment you speak to the moment the computer speaks back. So yeah, NLP is the big umbrella term for this whole field of AI. It's basically a mashup of computer science and linguistics, and its whole job is to translate our everyday language into something a machine can actually make sense of and do something with. It takes our jumbled words and gives them structure. The absolute simplest way to break down NLP is with this little equation right here. It's a two-step dance. First, the computer has to understand what's being said, and second, it has to come up with an intelligent response. And you guessed it, each of those parts has its own special name. And those two parts are natural language understanding, NLU, and natural language generation, NLG. Just think of NLU as the computer's ears. It's the listening and comprehension part. And NLG? That's the computer's mouth. It's in charge of creating or generating a response. So let's start with the listening part, NLU. Okay, let's get into NLU. This is where the computer has to play detective and crack the code of our language. And that is a huge challenge, mainly because our words can mean totally different things depending on how we use them. NLU is really where the heavy lifting happens. It's not just about knowing dictionary definitions of words. It's about figuring out the intent behind the words. To pull this off, it looks at the grammar, the syntax, and the context of the sentence, the semantics, to figure out what we're really trying to say. So for example, our language is packed with words that have multiple meanings, right? How in the world does an NLU model figure out which meaning we're going for? Let's take this first sentence. For us humans, the word current here has a really obvious meaning. But in this sentence, the word current means something completely different. We get that distinction instantly, but a computer has to be taught how to do it. And here is how NLU solves that puzzle. It looks at the other words in the sentence for clues. In that first sentence, the word swimming is a giant hint that current probably refers to the flow of water. In the second one, the word version tells the system that current means the most recent one. Understanding these relationships is really the heart of NLU. Okay, so the computer has listened and understood the request. Now it's time to talk back. This is where natural language generation, or NLG, steps in. This is how the machine actually finds its voice. What NLG does is take structured data, like numbers and key facts, and it spins that into a natural-sounding sentence or paragraph. The whole goal is to create a response that sounds like a human wrote it, not some clunky robot. NLG pretty much always works in these three stages. It's actually a super logical process. First, you've got text planning. Think of this like making an outline. The system figures out the most important info to include and the best order to say it in. Then comes sentence planning. This is where it fleshes out those bullet points into real sentences, adding connecting words and punctuation. And finally, you have the most important step, realization. This final stage is basically a grammar check on steroids. It makes sure all the rules are followed, so verbs are conjugated correctly, punctuation is right. This is exactly why the system knows to say ran and not something silly like runned. So we have the listener, NLU, and we have the speaker, NLG. Now let's watch them work together as a team in a super common real-world scenario, a chatbot conversation. So imagine you type this simple question into a chatbot. The second you hit enter, that whole NLP process we've been talking about kicks into high gear. First up, NLU. The listener gets to work. It immediately identifies your intent, which is just a fancy word for what you want. In this case, to get the weather. Then it pulls out the key piece of information, which is called the entity. Here, that's Sydney. So now the system has this nice structured command. Intent is get weather, entity is Sydney. With that, it can go look up the data, it finds out it's 25 degrees Celsius and sunny, and it hands that info off to the NLG component, the talking part. Now it's NLG's turn. It takes that raw data, 25 degrees and sunny, and runs it through its three-stage process to build a perfectly natural-sounding response. And just like that, the conversation is done.